Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are in Turkish Pavilion in Venice Architecture Biennial in shift 8. And today, Köken Ergun is with us. He's an artist. He was very generous to be with us today because we noticed him in a very short time. His presentation will be his dialogue with him will be very interesting because he comes from a different background, but he will teach us a lot, I think. I will present him shortly. Ergun, born in 1976, he trained as an actor in Istanbul University, and he studied ancient Greek literature in King's College London. But then he's interested in performances, made him an artist and video artist. He works both as a scholar and an artist. And he has very interesting work. The way he works is very interesting for us because he deals with lesser known minorities and their rituals, the communities and their rituals. He inhabits with them, and he lives with them, and with long periods of time he works with them and documents their rituals and performances. So it is very interesting work to experience and to learn about. He had a lot of video installations in various places in the world, so I'm not going to list them. So thank you, Köken, to be here and to share your thoughts with us.
Thank you for inviting. Thank you for. Yes, as you mentioned, I work on a certain subject starting with a long research period, or it has to be something that is part of my own life experience. For example, when I did the work in Berlin when I decided to do a work about wedding rituals of Turkish and Kurdish community in Berlin, I started attending their weddings without any camera first. Well, that's the most important thing when you're going to different community than yours, because you have to have access. And the access immediately doesn't immediately happen. Either you have to take a permission, or you must be liked by that community. You must be accepted by that community. You must be seen as a safe guest. So if you're a filmmaker dealing with imagery and cameras, if you're holding a device, that's always exclusive thing that you're holding in your hand. So to be included in the community, it's probably always better to first go without any cameras, to embed yourself into the community, to be a good guest, a safe and a good guest. That's, I think, the most important starting point for projects like mine. So in Berlin, I spent a couple of months going every weekend to a wedding, and then I was observing them. And then there was a TV station which had a program about weddings, which was catering the Turkish and Kurdish community there. And they had this program, and I communicated with them, and I said, can I join you when you're going to these weddings? Because they already go with a camera, so I would be the second camera. And I said, you can use my footage if you want. But at the end, they didn't like my footage because I shake the camera too much. So it's not for TV. Although we became very good friends with the camera crew, with the producers. It's a very small TV company, which is bankrupt now. And it became almost like a kind of addiction to me to go to a Turkish or Kurdish wedding every weekend when I was living in Berlin for, I think, almost a year, except for the time when the community takes their holidays, which was a couple of months ago, July and August. So I kind of stopped looking at that as an artwork or as a work that I do for art, but I started looking at my experience and moments, the relaxation or the complications that happens within the wedding time was for me like a school. So I was learning a lot. And that's when I discovered that I think my work deals with anthropology a lot. So that's when I started working with anthropologists, ethnographers. And I found out that their field research is pretty similar. To have access is the most important key. And then to have long-term observations on the subject is also important. And then comes the point when you will be editing. And that's the time of decision when you put together all this footage. For example, for me, it was, at that time we had mini DV cassettes. And it was like this, also almost my height, DVD, mini DV cassettes. And of course, at the end, if you want to do a short video or medium length video, you omit a lot of footage from that. So you have to kind of sacrifice a lot of memories that you have been given or you have experienced. So at the end, I think I used only 10% of that all footage. So why did I shoot so much? I think for me, there's a good example that I will give from a very important artist in my life, Paul Cézanne, the French painter, artist. He has this series towards the end of his life. He has this summer house in the south of France, and then he's filming, sorry, he's not filming, he's drawing the same mountain over and over and over again. And they keep asking him, have you lost your mind? Why are you just depicting the same mountain? And he doesn't listen to them. And we know in history, I think Merleau-Ponty was writing about this. I think the article is called Cézanne's Doubt, I think, which is a long time ago. I read it the last time. Anyway, so he doesn't answer any of these questions. And finally, one day he meets someone and he says, the mountain saw me. Meaning, like, he was trying to see the mountain for a very, very long time, and he couldn't see it. And then finally, he made a connection with the mountain by looking at the mountain over and over again in different light. And then we have a lot of these paintings now circulating in world museums, but I don't know which one is the one that the mountain saw him, but it's supposed to be for him the best, of course. What I'm trying to say is that you have to sometimes shoot the same thing over and over again, or the same subject over and over again, to get the essence of that subject or the topic. So that's why with projects that I do, the more I shoot is the better I understand the subject. Then there's another example that I did a work about beauty contests, beauty pageants of Filipino guest workers in Tel Aviv. And this could be interesting for you because you're studying architecture. Has anybody been to Tel Aviv by any chance? There's a very big bus station there called the Central Bus Station. In Hebrew, it's called the Tachana Merkezit, and it's a legendary building. It's a very modernist structure in the middle of this white city, and it's kind of now left alone because after the Second Intifada, during the Second Intifada, there was a twin bombing bomb attack, suicide attack to that place. And the Israeli public stopped using it, and they were the absence of the Israeli public was filled with Filipino guest workers who are spending their free time off day in that big building. And they also perform beauty pageants there because that's the most important cultural event for Filipinos home and abroad. So, for example, my access to that community was also similar. Yeah, you see one of them on the screen now. I think it's Dodalina. She's talking inside the kahana. It must be in one of the restaurants where people are also singing karaoke. You can run that without sound. That's a good idea. So before I reached this lady, for example, this work is composed of a main film and various interviews with the people who are involved in this community. So first I met the Filipino people in Tel Aviv, then they invited me to their beauty pageant, so I went to the beauty pageant. In the first one I didn't shoot, in the second one, which came a couple of months later, I shot. And I was very discreet about my shooting because unfortunately they live in one of the most xenophobic and most racist countries in the world, and completely founded on Jewish identity. So if you do not have a Jewish identity, you're considered by the state and by the public, majority of the public, as the other. And especially if you're a Filipino woman living in Tel Aviv, then you're in a very difficult situation. So the Filipino community has been targeted by the media, by the public, had a lot of conflicts, a lot of xenophobic attacks. So they are closing in. And where they're closing in is like the dream structure for Israel, which failed because the Tahana Markazit was designed so that it will bring people from all over the new Israeli state in to the not capital but the biggest city of the new country. But now it's completely deserted by the Israeli public, and it's filled in by the guest workers, not only the Filipinos, but also Nepalese, recently Eritreans, people from Sudan. So this, you might look, I mean, in your free time, please have a look at this architecture of this place as well. It could be interesting for you. So I gathered a lot of information on video, a lot of interviews, and also I researched a lot about the community's problems, and they published magazines, and every monthly magazine was collected by my crew. So for a duration of, I think, 2 years, I kept going to Israel, recorded, read a lot, and then finally I made a film, which you can see incomplete on YouTube. Another example I can give is the most recent film that I did. I shot it in Turkey. Has anybody been to Çanakkale? Okay, so there are some people who know the area. So for the non-Turkish participant, Çanakkale is important for several reasons and for several countries. First of all, for the significance of Çanakkale in Turkish history is that when the Ottoman Empire was fighting in that area against England, France, and the Allies, they won this war, and this is considered a very important war for Turkish history. On the other side, the defeated side was not only composed of English and French, but also a new, not even a nation, a new community called Australia and New Zealand. And they're called the Anzacs. And this was the first outgoing service for that colony at the time. And the young soldiers who went to this far corner of the world, from all the way from Australia and New Zealand, became legends. Many of them died, a huge number of people died for a war that wasn't really their business, but their boss, basically United Kingdom, the British Empire, has sent them there. So this Anzac legacy, and the Anzacs, the people are called Anzacs, are considered the founding fathers of Australia and New Zealand. So they are like, as in the film somebody says, they are like gods. So it's a very dogmatic subject. Not very people criticize this. So that's why the film is probably very important. That's why when it was first shown in Australia, it was considered quite controversial because it was one of the few critical approaches to this. In Turkey, it's also an untouchable, Çanakkale, and I like touching these untouchable subjects a lot. What I did, 2 years, I went to Çanakkale almost every month, sometimes twice a month. And since the last 10 years, there's a huge mass tourism there. Turkish people are put in buses from different kinds of parts of the country, and they have a bus trip. And then when they come to Çanakkale, there's a guide that goes on to the bus, and the guide tells about very patriotic, but very different from each other sometimes, narratives of the war. So for me, Çanakkale was where Turkish people really met, because it's such a polarized society, especially in the last years of the Ergun regime. And polarization is a global phenomenon now. Trump is doing the same. In England, we have massive polarization after Brexit as well. But what unites Turkish people is Çanakkale. What unites Australian people is also Çanakkale. They also come what they consider almost like a pilgrimage from all the way from Australia and New Zealand, especially young people. It's like an initiation rite to be an Australian. It is desirable for many Australians to have at least one trip in your lifetime to Çanakkale. So I have first, for the first 6 or 8 months, joined tours without any camera. I mean, I had a mobile phone, but I never even shot anything on that mobile phone. So for 1 year almost, I went there. I looked at the topography. I looked at how people are receiving these narrations, narratives told by the tour operators. And of course, as your architects, I was also interested in the architecture of cemeteries and architecture of memory. So this is why when we show this work finally in Turkey next year, we will have a series of talks about memory, architecture, and of course martyrdom, because they are considered martyrs in the Muslim culture, and heroes in the more secular Australian and New Zealand state narrative. So again, that work is about journeys, because people are making a journey to Çanakkale to receive something, but they're also emotionally so prepared to cry. So you see a lot of people crying in the film. You see a lot of people worshipping sculptures of soldiers, especially older women who are touching the hands of these bronze cast soldiers, and almost to the point that the soldiers, the places where the sculptures of the soldiers are most touched, are clean polished, almost like a mirror. And there are cannons where people climb on cannons and they can't get down from the cannons. So they're kind of very absurdic scenery there, and they're putting on a stage play every day for maybe 10 times in repetition, a patriotic play that is kind of more enriching the experience for the people. So it is what I call a tourism of martyrdom, and what other authors are also calling tourism of martyrdom. And it's a lot to do with memory. So because it's a lot to do with memory, I also had a lot of interviews with people, but this was very interesting because I never asked anybody for an interview. They came to me because I was just holding my camera there for almost a year. And it's such a charged environment that people want to just come and say something about their nationhood, or their how patriotic they are, how they like Çanakkale, how they love Gallipoli. If it's an Australian person, they say Gallipoli. Yeah, so after 2 years or 3 years, my projects are usually finalized, and there's a lot of research involved even before going to the field. So I pick up a subject and I talk to scholars who are working on that subject, and sometimes my assistant helped me to make a big bibliography, which we share with each other, of things to read or things to watch or things to look at. So we tick each of these boxes, like everybody in the crew desirably must read it, so we are informed about it. But of course, I read more because I shoot myself. I go myself to all these places to shoot. So, and at one point, reading and field work goes hand in hand. But then, after all the shooting is over, then I never go back to the books or never go back to the field. I keep a distance with me and the subject. So probably sometimes if there's no deadline for a commission or an exhibition, this could be 6 months or 8 months not looking at that topic at all, not opening the tapes, not reading about it, and then opening the tapes, watching every tape one by one from the beginning to the end, keeping the notes, a big notebook, and then on the wall of my studio, I always put on post-its my most favorite moments of those shootings, and then I start putting them together. For example, with this project in Çanakkale, I did not know how long the film would be. I never made a long feature film, but it ended up being a 90-minute feature-length documentary. But it was just me and sometimes an extra cameraman and my sound recorder. So with this little crew and a very little small budget, you can actually make a feature-length documentary. And this is kind of bypassing the whole market and the machinery of filmmaking, of production. A lot of people think that making a film is expensive, laborious, and you have to have a big crew, but I don't think it's necessarily true. Time is very important in film business because they have a big budget and people's salaries, so they have to work against time, and that is problematic sometimes because then you cannot really focus and you cannot do everything that you want. But in my case, in the case that I'm doing, there is unlimited amount of time. For example, this was a commission from a museum in Australia, and then when they asked for me if I would accept this commission, I said I would accept on the condition that you give me 3 years. So then they said, yeah, it's a bit long time for us. We're not used to this, but go ahead. So 3 years for me, is an ideal time of making a project, and also to go to the same subject or the same people over and over again, and to make several shootings is another advantage for these kind of projects. These are the things that you cannot have when you have deadlines and a large crew and a festival waiting for the film.
So, okay, sesim sizin mikrofondan yankılanıyor. Ben konuşurken siz mikrofonu geçici olarak kapatırsanız. Aslında şu anda iyi oldu. Okay, thank you for this wonderful presentation. I watched some of Köken's videos, but never watched something so insightful about the inner process of artistic working. So it was great, and it was a rare moment, I think, because we don't see other artists also do that, to talk about the process and the small parts and small challenges of the small or large challenges of the process. So thank you very much. So, okay, anyone for your questions? Ayaz?
Hi, sir. I wanted to ask, once you're done with the documentary and when it is prepared and ready to be seen by people, what is the life of the film, the documentary, and for how long do you think that the documentary will have an impact on people? Do you choose your subjects based on this decision, or just to send it to a festival or a biennale?
Yeah, that's a nice question. Thank you. I think that's the essential thing you have to decide before making any art or artistic creation. Is it going to be relevant for only the contemporary time, or is it going to be relevant for the future as well as the past? I think the ideal is that it's relevant for all ages. That's why we keep going to museums of archaeology. That's why we keep going to museums of modern art, which is an old art form than what contemporary art is. Of course, it would be ideal if you if you pick your subject in a way that that subject is going to be relevant in 10 years' time. For example, I can give you an example. Some of you might have seen my film, my first film, I Soldier, which is on YouTube, pretty popular. I've done that, I think, 14 years ago. And last year, there's this big exhibition, one of the most best attended exhibitions in the world in Germany, called Documenta in Kassel. And it was shown there. And this film is about Nation Day ceremonies in Turkish Republic. But ironically, they no longer do these kind of ceremonies in Turkey. When I shot it, it was very popular and still active. But suddenly it became more relevant again because of the hardline governing of the Erdogan regime, and especially in Germany with the rise of the far right. They're very scared in Germany that the right actually is now, I don't know if you have heard, there's a new left party which is trying to kick immigrants out as well. So now we have two very problematic parties in the political life of Germany. And this is a country with a past which is, as you know, terrible on that subject. So when this work was shown in Documenta in Kassel, it got a lot of attention after 14 years of 14 years after it's been made. But it was not because it was about Turkey. A lot of people in the audience thought, oh, is this our future in Germany? Is this going to come back? Because it's pretty much very similar to Nationalsozialismus, what Hitler's parades, and it borrows a lot from the Soviet era as well. So as the world is becoming more nationalist and populist and kind of hardlined, this work became more relevant. But would I know this before? I don't think so. I would probably, if I knew it, I would probably be in the stock exchange. I would earn a lot of money by seeing future trends. But there is something in creative people's thinking that there is something that they might have an intuition about. For the practical part of your question, I will say, yes, there are sometimes deadlines that you have to meet, send it to a film festival or something. But I think these shouldn't be as important as the long life of the project. And I think artists should never be worried if their work is not shown in the first 5 years of its making.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, anyone else? You might have, of course.
I have another question. I heard from your introduction that you were also training to performing arts and acting. And why don't you think that subjects like this, or do you think that subjects like this can be put into fiction writing and be performed in cinema or a theater, and it'll find an audience where people could access it through entertainment and not just it being a documentary as such?
Which kind of project?
Which kind of project?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Which kind of projects?
Kind of projects?
I forgot the name. A. Yeah, we just saw your video of Ashura, and if it would have been written by, because we come from India, the international students, and because there is a very strong link with Bollywood, and the fact that we over there make movies, and even if it is a true event, we present it to the audience in the form of an entertainment. So I wanted to ask, does this happen again in the Turkish cinema, or the theater in Turkish?
I'm not sure if I understood your question.
It would be a good way or a bad way to present Ashura in a fiction movie, like with characters and with all the things like that, to tell about their life or to tell about their experience. So maybe you are asking what's the difference to tell it as a fiction and or to inhabit their lives as a documentary artist, or
Okay, so if I understood correctly, your question is which is better, to show Ashura as a documentary or to make a film about Ashura with actors, fiction.
I think the documentary has its own power because it shows the events in its true form. But when you place it in the boundaries of an entertainment, then I think it finds a bigger audience, because it has been framed for the audience to read and understand the subject.
But do you consider documentary as not? Do you consider fiction as entertainment and documentary as something else?
I think then it is subjective. Because according to me, when you see a documentary, and for example, if it is a subject from some other country and not from the country where I belong, if I would have an interest to watch it, I would. But if it is in parallel to it, if I've been given an entertaining film from the other country, then probably I would choose to see the film to understand the context and its relationship with its history.
Interesting, because normally people prefer to watch a documentary about other cultures, but you're saying that you would prefer to watch a fiction movie about other cultures, correct?
Yes.
It's interesting because there are some people, for example, I don't read so much fiction novels. I liked reading about history, and I was discussing this. I was talking with a ethnographer, historian friend, and in her house I saw a big library of novels, and I said, "Oh, you read novels, but you're a historian and ethnographer, and do you learn from fiction?" And she said, "Yes, I learned from fiction writers about those times. So it's interesting because I have a different opinion and she has a different opinion, and you have a different opinion with other people. I'm sure people other than you would prefer to watch a documentary about that culture. But this brings us to the conclusion, probably it's better to do both.
Yes.
Okay, anyone else? Yağmur, you are taking notes, so maybe you have something in your mind. Oh, no, please. Okay. Zeynep.
Hi. Just some addition to Ayaz's comments and to your ethnographer friend. I'm a big fan of Jane Austen, and I learn a lot, I think, from the... It's funny, I really like reading her novels. I prefer, for instance, reading that novels to learn about the woman in that times than like reading about history books about that woman in that time. So I think there might be a big, I don't think that we can just separate the two from which one is better. Probably when we need to read one or watch one, we do it, or vice versa. Probably just wanted to like make this addition. Yeah.
Can I make a further complication? There's a third reality, is your own experience and in that time. So instead of watching a documentary or instead of watching a film about that country, just get on the plane and go to that country and observe, and don't make it into an artwork. Because if you make something into an artwork, you omit a lot of things about the real experience. So this brings you to the question, what is representation? Can you represent nature? Can you represent people adequately with one or two works of art? So that's a discussion for ethnographers also, like they go to the field and they take notes and then write about this. But a lot of things get lost in writing, and a lot of things get lost in filming. Whether you film a documentary or a feature, it doesn't matter. The real question is that the difference between the real experience and the on-screen adaptation that is done by a certain human being called the artist or the filmmaker or the fiction writer. Jane Austen, for example. I mean, she's portraying a society at that time, but it will never be equal. She can never cover the whole society. You know, she can never cover, or Orhan Pamuk is writing about, let's say, the Gecekondu villages in his, not last, but the one before the last book. Something Strange in My Mind, I think it's called. And it's an excellent novel, but sometimes we have to understand that what we're reading is both for documentary and for fiction, is the creation of the filmmaker, even if it's or the of the director. Even if it's a documentary, the filmmaker is constructing a new identity from what he has shot. So it's not really showing the reality of life. The real reality of life is what you experience, and those are usually the moments and the things that you can never express to other people. For example, you saw something on the street in India, and 10 minutes later, you're going to meet your friend who didn't see that thing. Let's say you're in Mumbai and you saw something, a street fight between two people, and one was from a different caste, obviously, and the other was a different caste. And then there was an Australian tourist involved in the fight, verbal fight. And then there was a moment which was sublime for you because you have seen an amazing interaction with these people. And then you run and tell this to your friend. What you're doing is you're making a representation to your friend. You said, like, you won't believe what I saw, that this and this and this and this happened. He's close in time to that interaction, but he will never grasp it because he's, first of all, he's not you, he's not your eyes. So representation always deforms the reality. So this is when we go back to the ancient Greek philosophical discussions. You all know Plato. or Eflatun, his idea was, in his state, he did not allow arts because he said art is a deforming of reality. Because we're running away from the real, the idea, and then by making this, he would allow, for example, theater in his new state, in the fantasized state that he has, and Aristoteles comes and he challenges that idea afterwards. But this is another layer of the discussion for you.
Hello there. I'm wondering that is there any difference between the art video and documentary, and how can you take a position for your works? There is an artworks or documentary, because you said before you will not experience really and go in there and observe, but not make an art from them. And when I saw your videos, I thought like it was like documentary, but nowadays it can call easily as an artwork. I'm wondering your position.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Who knows, and who cares? Do we care if it's called an artwork or if it's called a documentary? I don't really care, for example. But I think somebody has to write about this, so they care. So there is a department of sociology and in the universities, and there is a department of city sociology now. So there is an artwork or there's a book, and is this belonging to the department of city sociology, or is this belonging to the department of cultural anthropology or another sociology? So these fragmentations and these names, I think, are not necessary, but they can be useful. I understand, but as a creator of that book or architecture, I think you should never ask that question to yourself before you make it. Representation and perception comes, perception and titling comes much after the actual production of the work. And I think it's not up to the artist to decide what that work is going to be called.
Okay, great. Anyone else? So I may ask you a little one. I don't know if it is relevant or not, but have you ever felt that your crew's presence there on the site changed the experience? And have you ever felt that you need to film yourself or the crew to correctly capture the experience?
That's very. Thank you. Recently, I have asked the other cameraman and the other photographers to always shoot me while I'm shooting other people. I've never incorporated this into the proper film itself, but I think one day I will, because I'm questioning this representation myself a lot. But what I'm doing is that I'm putting myself more and more in the film by way of interviews. As I said in the last project, that people come up to me, to my camera, and ask me questions, or say, I want to talk to you because you're a camera, right? You have power in your hand, and basically they're talking to you. And then I ask them questions, and I ask them questions, and we make a dialogue. So sometimes we talk like small talk. So I keep this in the film because I want the audience to feel who the filmmaker is, at least the voice. But this is a question I ask constantly to myself. How does the camera transform the experience? Because when you see a camera, you change your attitude in most cases. But it really depends if it's a public offering. Most of my works are about, what can I say, rituals that are attended by large groups of people. and there are a lot of cameras around as well. So people are not camera shy, and on the contrary, they want to show more to the camera, or they are happy that the camera is around. But then that's another complication. That means they are changing their attitude. So it's a really fine line. I mean, it's very difficult to answer this question. It has to be case by case studied.
Well, thank you. And I think thank you very much for all our contributors, and thank you very much for Köken for this very insightful, very interesting, and very helpful conversation with us. What you shared it will be very, I think, appreciated by our work. I think. Thank you very much for being here, for your time.
Thank you very much for having.
Thank you very much for having.
Have a good time in Venice.
Have a good time in Venice.